Okay. Good morning. Welcome to our Google Hangout. I'm Bill White, and with me is?
I'm Jackie Ng.
And we're delighted that you've joined our Hangout. We're already starting to get some questions, but let me tell you first, we're at Northwestern University here in Evanston, Illinois. We thank you all for being participants in the Coursera course, Power Onboarding. We're now halfway through our third week, and people seem to be watching the videos, taking the quizzes, and reading the material. So thank you very much for that. And we hope you find it valuable. Jackie and I have been reading your posts. In some cases, we've been commenting on those. She's been commenting on them more than I have. But I've been reading as many as she has. So we talk a lot about each of the questions that you have. And while you're sending in some more questions, we have a couple of comments that we thought would be interesting for you to hear from us about some of the threads that were started on these posts, some of which traveled a ways, some of which are kind of stopped at the start. So let me start with one, and then I'll have Jackie talk about one. Excuse me. One that fascinated me was a comment about Malcolm Gladwell's point about that it takes 10,000 cycles or repetitions to become a world-class expert in almost anything. And I think this is a fascinating concept. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I think most of his things are quite good, and he always finds such unique things that you can talk about and sort of out of the ordinary statistics. In my other class that I teach for MBAs, we talk a lot about repetitions. And we talk about corporate repetitions and how important they are to allow you to get to a very high proficiency level. And that's a little bit about behind Gabarro's article that you read in the first class about taking charge. And those repetitions now in the corporate world are things like quarterly reviews, capital budgeting exercises, human resource reviews, some of which are held quarterly, some of which are held more frequently, but a number of them are only held annually. And so for you to get to the proficiency level that you'd like, particularly when you're onboarding and going through that first several months and quarters, you need to have these cycles. You need to have these repetitions so that you can get good at doing that same thing in the second and third repetition. So Gladwell's point is right. We're not trying to get you all to be world-class athletes or world-class managers, but the more you have conscious repetitions and learn from the previous one, the more effective you'll be and the more quickly you will reach competency. Jackie, you want to take another idea?
Sure. Another one that came up was from the readings on Amy Cuddy. And basically, I think some of the comments or the feedback that we got was that some of the things that were recommended in the article were from an Anglo-American or a Westernized perspective. But how does this actually relate when you're thinking about other cultures, or if you are working cross-culturally or cross-functionally with different teams? And so how do you relate, or how do you change yourself? I think it's less about changing yourself in terms of who you are and how you behave, but more to do with understanding how different cultures work. So for example, if you're working with a German team, understanding what the norms are in that sort of environment, and culturally what, from a German perspective, or a Chinese team. And also to be aware of also time zones. And so when you're setting things up like meetings, to be aware of what time it is in another time zone. And so culturally, I think to find a time zone that works for everyone, or is sensitive to people on different schedules. And so I think those are some of the things that you can do to fit into different cultures, or at least to change a little bit, to at least acknowledge that you're sensitive to what's going on around the world.
While we're speaking about cultures, there was another question on the threads about dress codes, and some good comments about dress codes. And I think the generalization that we can leave all of us with is you should, when in doubt, dress up. You always want to dress a little better than the people around you. It's relatively easy if you're going to wear a tie to take it off if it's too much, which reminds me of a story I told Jackie earlier today. One of my friends, one of my students who had been out of work, not out of work, in the job for some time, had been transferred to a new division and decided that he would begin wearing a tie to work, which was not a culture in his previous division. However, he found out on the first day that he arrived that only the supervisors wore ties, and he was not a supervisor at that point. So he quickly took care of the tie But you need to be sensitive to how other people dress, because there are situations where what you wear is a code for who you are. One other quick story about that: when I was a college student, I was doing a research study at one of our local hospitals. And as part of the study, I had to spend time checking out the water carafes in different rooms. And I went to ask my boss there, what should I wear to be on around the hospital? And they said, well, just go down to the, storeroom and pick out a smock. And of course I did. I came back up and put my smock on and started walking around the halls. And totally unbeknownst to me, I had picked out this smock of a color that was identified me as a resident in the hospital. So shortly after that, people would stop me and they'd say, doctor, could you tell me where to go to radiology? And I would explain, I'm not really a doctor. Anyway, that got to be too long. So I just simply answered the questions for the people. So it was very embarrassing for a while. Obviously, I was able to change the next day. But be careful how you present yourself, particularly as how you dress. But be sure you dress up at least. Do not dress below the average of the organization.
And to add to that, I think it's important for making first impressions too. So I think how you dress is really important when you're making that transition to a new job. This is I think it's important in terms of the way that people sense of who you are and if you're taking things seriously. And like you said before, it's very easy to take off your tie if you feel like you're overdressed. But I don't think there's ever really a situation on your first day of work, for example, or the first week, to be slightly overdressed, to show that you're taking things seriously.
The point of the whole dialogue here is to tie back to power onboarding, and the idea in power onboarding is to do as much due diligence, to do as much investigation long before your first day on the job, so that you're not surprised. So you shouldn't be surprised if you visited the plant, visited the headquarters, visited the office, or already have been an employee and you're just being promoted.
And I think sometimes there are ways that you can change the dress code too. I used to work, one of my jobs a few years ago was to work on a trading floor, and it was 2008, and I think most employers or employees weren't feeling too great because of everything that was going on in the financial markets. So someone had a great idea of putting on a tie, which was not something that people typically did in the trading floor environment. It was very business casual. And I think people caught on to that and thought it was a good idea, because sometimes how you dress is a portrayal of how you feel, I think. And people wanted to feel like they were feeling sharp and ready for the day, even though the market and the environment was not great. I mean, there were a lot of layoffs at that point. But I think dressing up a little bit made people feel more secure and feel better about themselves. So
I think that's probably more than you wanted to hear from us about dressing up and dressing appropriately, but it's very, very important, the first impressions. I want to go back to another thread from class 1, and that had to do with the question from one of our students about how risky is it to take a step back in your career, to take a job that might have less prestige and maybe even less compensation. And the answer to that is, if you thought it through well, it's not too risky. Earlier on, I'd done some research in this area, and I actually wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal, which appeared in 2007. That's been a few years ago. And actually, for those of you that really want to go back and research it, it was on December 1st, 2007. And the title of the article was "How to Get Ahead by Going Backward." And the whole concept of the article was that many of us find ourselves in a job that we're doing okay. We're satisfied with the job, but we have this nagging issue in our mind that we'd love to do something else, and we'd like to go to that other job. And the risk of finding another job in the area where we're less experienced but more motivated is high, but it's all doable. And there's a couple of tricks to it. Let me share those with you right now. Things to be concerned about before you make that change. Number one is you should be running to something rather than away from something. You want to think about what is it that you really, really want to do, and will that make you happy as you go forward. I'm looking at my notes at the same time here, okay? And you never want to do this spontaneously, not on the spur of the moment. So if you're mad at your boss, this is not the time to take a step backwards. This should be premeditated to a great degree so you understand where you want to go. You don't want to burn any bridges, obviously, when you're doing the same thing. You want to think about what is your safety net. do you have a safety net in case this new job, the new job you want to move to, is not all you expect it to be. So you should have a plan B for that. And third, you should find some colleagues and some trusted advisors who will give you some advice as you move into that category, move into a new area. What I found in my career, and you see in this article for those of you that are interested, a number of people have made these changes going back to a job that was different from what they had. They had minimum qualifications for it, so they had to take a drop in prestige. But they're able to move through that new field very quickly because of many parts of their experience transferred to it. So don't be afraid of making that change. It's a good thing to do. I've done it twice in my career, and it's worked out both times for me. So think about that.
And you have a point about if 60% rule, right?
I do.
Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I think I talked about it in one of the classes, but let me elaborate on it a little bit, which I think is important. So if you can look at it two ways. If you're going to apply for a job, or if you're going to promote somebody, you're trying to pick out of a pool of people who's the best candidate to promote. My 60% rule works like this. If the person you want to promote is 60% ready in the skill sets, in other words, they don't have all the skills, but they have a number of skills, but they have 60% of the important skills. And the important thing here is and they have support of the organization around them, the organizational support, their organizational colleagues, a better way to say it. If they have that, then they should take the job. So that you can look at that. If you're promoting someone out of a pool of people, and you have someone that's very ready, not so ready, and maybe 60% ready, and you like the person that's 60% ready, from personality or from a cultural match, take a chance on that person if the organization wants to support her. Why is the second and important, the second factor important? Because inevitably on your new job, you're going to run into problems. You're going to have an issue you can't solve. You'll have someone difficult to deal with, and you may get off on the wrong track. And at that point, you want your colleagues to pull you back. You want someone in your organization who's a trusted advisor to say, careful, Bill, don't go down that road. But be careful how fast you're moving here. So if you're only 60% ready, you have to continue to learn. As you're learning, you need a support mechanism, a support group that's going to pull you back. So I found the 60% rule works pretty well. My daughter found it worked pretty well when she applied for a job, but she was just barely 60% ready back in the .com days. Very few people had the total experiences there, but she had 60% plus. And she took a chance on a job that was, quote, over her head, but she found she was able to learn about it fast enough because the people gave her support. So that can work. Should we try to answer a question here?
Sure, let's do it. So we have one that just came in from,
it's about Amy Cuddy?
Amy Cuddy, yes. Here, let's select it so everyone can see it.
You should see this now. Amy Cuddy is one of my favorite authors. She's a faculty member at Harvard Business School. She was a former faculty member here at Kellogg, and we miss her terribly. We'd rather have her back here, but she's obviously doing very well there. She talks about a lot of things about which I talk about in the class. And one is you're making first impressions, and also her idea of power positions and building your confidence when you go into an interview or when you're going into a meeting. And those of you that have read her articles now probably have the vision in your mind of this Wonder Woman or some comic character that has this powerful pose, hands on the hips, legs spread, feeling very strong in their positioning. And her idea is, which has been researched very successfully, her idea is that if you do that for 2 minutes or so, it takes a full 2 minutes, the physiology in your body actually reacts to this power pose, and your confidence is increased, and your ability to face adversity, to face other people, and when you walk into a meeting or you walk into a classroom, or when you walk into meet with people, your confidence will be much higher. Now the question is, for females, could this come across as being too aggressive? And the answer is possibly, in my mind. However, you're not going to change yourself significantly from the person you used to be to this new person you're going to be with this power posing. It'll move you a little bit along the spectrum. The danger of it moving you too far that you're going to just feel this energy in your system to change your personality that much is very, very, very low. So I recommend you try it. I think it's a fabulous idea. I've tried it. It works for me. It's something that takes a few minutes before you go into a situation where you want to feel very confident. But the physiology really does work. So don't worry about being too aggressive. I don't think that's a danger. I think you'll probably come off as being more confident than you traditionally have been.
And just to add to that, I think our perceptions of ourselves are much more vivid in our own minds compared to what other people or how other people perceive us. And I think even if you feel like you're being overpowering or overconfident, I think in some cases or in most cases, it may just come out as being just right to other people because of the way that we perceive ourselves as opposed to how other people think about us.
I'm going to go off on a tangent just a little bit here because I think what Jackie mentions is very important. We find this for people preparing for interviews. And one of the suggestions that we give to people is they anticipate the questions that are going to be asked. They actually rehearse their answers, and we rehearse them repeatedly. One of the great ways to rehearse them, by the way, is to, if you don't have a lot of time, is to talk to yourself on your cell. Just leave a message for yourself on your cell phone. Usually you can do up to 2 minutes on your cell phone, and you can give an answer to a hypothetical question that might be asked of you. There's two things you need to do after that, however. One is do not, under any circumstances, listen to your response that's been recorded right after you recorded it. Wait for at least 4 or 5 hours, then listen to it. It's amazing how good you sound once you listen to a recording that you've immediately made and how bad you sound if you waited 4 or 5 hours to look at it. Those of you that have done recordings or have been videotaped know how this works. So the point of my comment here is that it's almost impossible to over-rehearse when you're taking a rehearsed statement and you're going into a stressful situation like an interview. Actresses and actors know this. They can rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, but when they get into on the stage, in the stress of the moment and the dynamics of the moment, it's very hard to look like you're over-rehearsed. So don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid that you're going to come over too canned or too professional, and that's probably not the right word, but too just over-rehearsed. Too mechanical is the word I was trying to think of. Okay? So, great question, and I think I wouldn't worry about it, but use Amy Cuddy's power polls. It works. You have another question?
Sure. Our next question here is from Luis.
We're reading the question at the same time. Well, this is someone that can't see right now.
Yeah, you can't see our video, but he does have a question. He wants to ask in more detail about the resistant advisor. It is not totally clear to him.
Well, the resistant advisor is not an advisor. I guess that's where I'd start.
Yes.
Advisors are people who voluntarily want to help you. And I guess, it depends upon how you approach people. And if you're looking for them to become a possible mentor, and you simply just want advice, someone that you truly want to share ideas with, or particularly get their view of an issue that you want to deal with. So the 2 or 3 points that I would start with here. Number one, do not, under any circumstances, ask for advice when your mind is made up. That's really bad, because there you're not looking for advice, you're looking for confirmation. Or you can look for confirmation, but tell them that. Don't say, I'm looking for advice. So you're only looking for advice when you have a couple alternatives and you're willing to accept ideas on both sides of the alternatives. That's number one. Number two, it may be that you've asked for some advice and you've gone back a second time and the advisor is resistant, and that may be because you didn't close the loop. So you have to close the loop after that person gives you advice, even if it's bad advice. You still have to go back to them and say, I tried it, I thought about it, for the following reasons it wasn't as appropriate as I thought it was, and thank you very much for giving it to me. If, on the other hand, the advice was good, you used it, it worked, then you really want to go back to that person and tell them, thank you so much, I used it, and here's what happened. It actually did work out as you predicted. And that opens the door now for you to go back the second or third or multiple times to that person and ask for advice again. So have an open mind before you go to someone. Ask them for advice. Don't ask them for time. Always ask them for advice. Do not ask them to be a mentor, because people will react very negatively to that. If you ask me, would I be your mentor? I'm going to say, I don't know how much time that's going to take. I don't want to make that commitment. But if you ask me for advice, people, even the grizzled old timers, will say, of course, I'd love to give you some advice. So ask me the question, and it's easy for me to do that for you. So have an open mind, actually take action on it, and give feedback to the person. That should reduce most of the resistant advisors. Any other ideas?
Well, actually, do you have a sense of, I think it's important to get varied advice too. So seek out advisors who are in different aspects of your life. And so in a way, they'll give you different angles or different perspectives on the same issue. Do you have any ideas on how we can figure out who those people are? Or?
Well, it ties into one of the threads that was,
Exactly,
it was on one of the last classes. I think it was in class 3 about who can be your advisors. And by the way, I love one of the posts. I think it was Lydia who said, my mother-in-law has turned out to be a very good advisor for me, which is just wonderful. You find these people in the least expected places. And so to comment on Jackie's question, the reason I asked that question of you is I want you to think way beyond the normal people. It's easy to think about your colleagues and former bosses, and they're the traditional people that we're going to look for as we're going through a transition. But think beyond that is, to use the social networking people, think 2 or 3 degrees of separation away. And that may take asking someone who they would recommend that you should talk to. A recommended to another recommendation to another recommendation is usually not bad. And sometimes you get too far away that they will not be knowledgeable enough. But sometimes you can follow a trail that will find people who are more knowledgeable and are totally objective because they are away from the situation that you're trying to get the advice to help solve. So keep working on finding teammates and finding people who will help you through the transition. They're extraordinarily valuable, extraordinarily valuable. And let me again transition to another topic that we're going to talk a little bit about more in later classes. And that is your new affinities. In every job change that I've been through and that my colleagues have been through and my students have been through, that frequently will come back to me and say, gosh, I wish I knew Susie in Department X, and I wish I'd known her sooner. I didn't get to know her until I was here 6 months or 9 months or a year, and she would have been extraordinarily valuable to me on day 1 or week 1. And that's one of the purposes of meeting with your boss early and having your boss identify you, your manager identify for you, your new affinities, people that you should get to know sooner rather than later. And that will help extend your influence group and the people who are going to help you get through the projects that you're going to decide on. So as you're thinking about your teammates, helping you through this transition, your trusted advisor most likely is going to be your significant other. If that person knows anything about business or about your career, that's the first person to turn to. But think about reaching far beyond your normal advisors. And that's what I found and others have found. Some really superb advisors who can help you through a transition in surprising ways.
And I think also, just to add to your point about when you're starting a new job and going to your boss and seeing who those potential advisors could be, it's also, I think, important to think about people outside of your boss or your immediate manager as well. Because especially in large corporations or companies these days, you do have direct managers, but you also have situations where you've got a line or are reporting to someone else, or you're working in teams with other people. And so I think it's important to reach out to all of those people as well when you first get onto the job, so that you can prepare yourself so that you know sort of what the situations are in each different team that you will be a part of. And in that case, I think it also increases your chances of finding good, trusted advisors that you can go to for advice. The more people, it's a game of numbers here. The more people that you talk to, the more likely you are to find those 1 or 2 or 3 key people in your life that are going to be meaningful to you.
Oh, I can't reinforce that enough that what Jackie says. You always should have at least one person in your life who's your trusted advisor. And that's the person who can say to you, Bill, that's a stupid idea. Or Bill, why are you doing that? And the person can be identified usually by someone who loves you. And I'm going to use the word love not in a romantic sense, but in the sense that they care enough about you that they're going to tell you the truth. And they're not afraid to tell you the truth. So the more of those people, you're not going to have a lot of them. You're going to have a few, just as Jackie said. You should have at least one at every phase of your life. It's nice to have 2 or 3. But those are the folks who really care about you and how you progress and your personality and how you progress in your career and also in your life. So if you don't have a trusted advisor now, keep trying to find one. It really will make a big difference. I know this is a question that's just come up about Amy Cuddy. And I tend to speak fast, as you've noticed already on this commentary. And the clarification question is that, Did I make it clear? I did not make it clear that if you're going to do power posing, you're not going to do it in public. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. You're going to do it in private. You're going to do it before the event that you're preparing for, whether it's an interview or whether it's a meeting. Amy didn't say how long before that you have to do it, but my guess is if you read the research, and maybe it's in there, I did not see it, it's probably relatively soon before the time lag between the time you do power posing and the time you're going to use it should be relatively short. But my guess is it could be an hour, but it's probably in that range. It's not a day, obviously, or probably 2 hours, but it's probably within the range of minutes to an hour. So you need to find some place before you have the interview, before you go to the meeting, to get into your physical pose, to make yourself larger, make yourself larger, big, and do the power pose and hold it. The key thing here is I've tried this a couple times. You're going to give up after a minute. A minute's a long time. 2 minutes is an eternity. And so what will happen to is you get yourself set up that way and you figure, well, nothing's happening and it's awful long. But trust me, do the full 2 minutes. It makes a difference. It's a good question.
Yeah.
We're looking for some more questions, so please send them in. While we're waiting to see the ones that we'll address, let me comment on a couple other things that have come on through the threads. One of them in class 3 was about matrix reporting relationships. Was I asked about, excuse me, earlier on in class, that was in class 2 actually, about the matrix reporting relationships, and a number of you have discussed how your experiences have worked in matrix reporting. I would like to broaden that just a little bit in a way that might be useful to you. Even though you're not in a technically matrix organized company or organization, think about it in your mind that way anyway. And here's a way to think about it. Jackie has some things to add to this. Think about all those people that your boss is going to go to when your boss is thinking about reviewing you or giving you an appraisal or thinking about considering you for promotion. And you may have a 360 system in your organization, which Jackie will talk about in a minute. But if you don't have one, you should have on your list of affinities, people that would be in your informal matrix, all of those folks who your boss would go to check. I'm thinking about, if he asks the question, I'm thinking about promoting Bill. How has your experience been with Bill? How does he work with other people? Where do you see him? How do you see him doing things? How do you see him behaving and acting on the job? Now, it sounds political, and it is. It's political in the good sense, because here you're trying to be sure that you influence and you are relating to and you are contributing to those folks who are going to determine your career. Now, if you have a 360 system in your company, is that not necessary? Is that not necessary, Jackie?
It still is, because in some companies, or a lot of them, I think these days, you get to choose the people who are giving you the 360 reviews. I think generally what happens is that you can choose some people who will be giving you feedback, and then your manager chooses some as well. And so I think what's important there is if you are choosing the people who are giving you your reviews, you want to be able to choose people who know you in different senses and different lights and can comment on your different abilities and your skills and your and how you interact with teams and other people within your organization. And so I think regardless of whether you have a 360 or you don't, or you are in a matrix organization, I think it's very important to be thinking about not only who your direct manager is and your colleagues, but also people who span outside of that. And I think it's important also when you're thinking about making a career transition, because those are the types, to know more about the types of jobs that are available out there. I think that's also important, especially when you're getting feedback.
Yeah. Let me go back to the original question, however, that was posted on one of the threads, and that was experience with matrix organizations, because I took a detour here to a non-traditional matrix organization. Oh, by the way, before I forget, if you're going to pick, the people who are going to review in the 360, be sure you don't pick just all your friends. You have to have some objectivity.
Yeah.
And your boss is going to notice that if you do that, but we'll all be smart.
And I think people in different levels too, because I think people who see you in different positions and roles. I think that's very important.
You'll all figure that out, I know, but I want to be sure to make that explicit to everyone that is listening. In a matrix organization, there's some unique problems about doing your job. The first one is priorities. Typically in matrix organizations that I've worked in and my students have worked in, they'll come back and say to me, Professor White, I'm having difficulty here because I have 3 different, quote, bosses in this matrix organization. Each of them are giving me assignments. And each one of them thinks their assignment is more important than the other 2. How do I handle that? And there's not an easy way to handle that. You can obviously go back to each one of the managers individually and kind of discuss the priorities and explain the priorities from the other managers. But that's slow, and you're interpreting things, and sometimes the value gets lost in the interpretation. My suggestion is you get all of the managers in one room. It's just not easy to do, I recognize that. But it will save everyone a lot of time. You get them in the room and let them explain their priorities. And only between the 3 of them can they set the priorities for you. You're put in an impossible position if you're working for 3 different managers and they're asking for projects. They all have high priority. And then that also includes deadlines, because first you'll get the priority set, then the question is, when are the deadlines? And are those deadlines going to overlap, or are they going to compound as you go forward? So think about how you can get those deadlines set. If you can do it, organizing them as they've been suggested to you, that's fine. Again, if they conflict, get the people together. Maybe it's just 2, maybe it's all 3. In the matrix organization, you have an added need and maybe a responsibility to go back to the multiple managers to be sure you get clarification, because you've got to keep all 3 of them happy. So the question is, who's the most important of the 3? And the answer is the person that's going to decide whether you get promoted and going to decide your raise. Okay, again, we're back to politics, but these are positive politics. So be sure that that person gets to work on first. Although if it's something that's the other person, another manager has this more important, critical to the company, you obviously have to do that first. So it's priorities for the company, and then priorities for the manager who reviews you personally. We go to another question?
Sure, let's do it. The next question comes from Vernon. So it's to do with with how we can apply the course contents, especially when working in consulting with nonprofits. It's an interesting question.
Well, it depends upon what kind of nonprofits you're working with. I spend a lot of time volunteering with the Northwestern University Health Systems here right on the North Shore of Chicago, and also with the university itself, which is a nonprofit, of course, and with the local museum, the Field Museum. All of these are relatively large museums with several thousand employees in a hierarchical structure, and people moving through jobs, at a pace that's probably the same, maybe sometimes faster than you'd see in a corporate world, either in a private company or a public company. So virtually all the things that we're talking about in the course do apply to nonprofits. I'm sure there's a few there, but in a small nonprofit where the organizational hierarchy is different. But in the course, the main idea of the course is for you to understand the context of the organization you're going to be going to, or the one you're working in and moving into a new job, and to how you can optimize your transition to a new job. And the jobs are going to be similar. They're going to be structured in a similar way. Job descriptions are going to be there for any job you're going to, whether it's a nonprofit or profit, unless it's the smallest of a nonprofit where people do not have job descriptions. But even there, the job you're going into is one that you have to understand, and the more you can get to understand the nuances of that, and the more you can understand the requirements and the new social affinities and the objectives and the culture of that job, before you show up, which is the whole idea of power onboarding, to do as much as you can before you show up, those things still work. There shouldn't be a lot of differences here. I'm trying to think of some other nuances. Jackie, you may have thought of one.
I think there's a clarifying question here.
Okay.
Mostly homeless services and foster care, social service related.
Oh, those are, I'm not sure I can answer that very well for you, but let me talk about maybe some of the subtleties. I think, let me expand on that a little bit to think about those are really individual performers, almost working on your own, but certainly in the field, you'd be working on your own to a great degree. But in a service organization, like a hospital, or even a healthcare organization that's doing home care, someone is going to be reviewing your work. Someone reviews your work no matter where you are. We all are followers to a certain degree in different organizations and different roles that we play. So it's the idea is to think about, as a follower, as a contributor to what the greater goal of the organization, how can we do that best? And how can we learn enough about the role we're going into before day one so that we can be very, very productive, more productive than anyone expects as we start out in a job. So yeah, we could take this in a couple other directions, but I want to focus just on the onboarding process, which is really the reason that I hope most of you have signed up for the course, about what you can do to have a more powerful, a more effective, a more rapid onboarding experience. Okay, I hope that clarifies that, and you can clarify it more if I haven't. Let me talk about another topic here for just a minute, and that's conflict with managers. This thread had a number of responses in class 3, and I'm sure there are more responses still coming in on that. You know, again, it's a little bit beyond the sort of the boundaries of onboarding, although sometime during your onboarding process, which by definition is going to take quarters, you could have some conflict with the boss. And one of the readings that I gave you called Managing Your Boss is a long-term classic that's been read over and over and over again, and we've been using it in my class at least for a dozen years. And it goes back to the 80s. It's still one of the most valuable, useful articles that you can have about how to manage your boss, including difficult bosses. Difficult bosses are hard, so let me give you a couple thoughts on it. First of all, is it you or is it Memorex, to quote an old phrase? You need to identify and reflect on, is this boss difficult for you? Is this boss difficult for everyone that works for her or for him? And if the person is difficult for many people, chances are the organization knows that. You haven't discovered that for the first time. Someone else has been impacted by this boss. And so the idea, if it's a generic problem and the boss is difficult for everyone, then the easy way to work your way through it is to watch your colleagues, to watch the people in your cohort, to see how they work with this boss. You'll find some tricks from that will be very, very situation specific. It's hard to give a generic an answer to that until you know the specifics of the boss's behaviors. So they have probably worked some ways their way through it. Sometimes it's useful to confront the boss. Obviously, if you have 360 reviews and you can be as honest as you possibly are comfortable being, then you want to feed this back to the boss as much as you can, and hopefully the boss will take notice of it. One of the things you know about 360s is that they get reviewed by the next level up. So if you have a difficult boss, hopefully your boss's boss knows that this is an issue. And usually, if it's a boss that's difficult with a lot of other people and they're not as effective as they can be in their job, so we should sort out effective bad bosses and not effective bad bosses. Not effective bad bosses sooner or later will be changed, moved, modified, adjusted somehow, or put out to either a holding area or moved out of the organization by the next level up, because they have to solve this problem. Failing all of this, another approach to a bad boss, if it's a generic boss, and other people have seen it, is for a coalition to be formed by you and your colleagues. And then between you as a group and with some advice from human resources, if you have such a person in human resources or in your service company or in your organization, then you need to have a confrontation with that boss. It's high risk, but if you do it as a coalition, it reduces the risk a lot. Okay? That you're going to be all treated in a bad way, or you're going to be fired, or the ultimate risk, obviously. Now, so that's the generic boss. Now, the other one is, are you having trouble with this boss and no one else seems to have trouble with this boss? That happens. That happens a fair amount. And so now the question is, you have to reflect on your style, your boss's style, your expectations, the boss's expectations, the clearness of objectives. Have you gone on? If a boss gives you sloppy objectives and you don't go back and clarify them, shame on you. You have to get them clarified. So the whole idea in the Managing Your Boss article is that when you have a boss that's not providing you with all the tools, the information, the communications, the goals, the feedback, the tools that you need, first of all, you need to figure out what's missing. Did you misunderstand something? And whatever's missing, then you have to go back to that boss and say, for me to accomplish this goal, this task, this project, I'm missing some things. I'm missing some support with other people. I'm missing some information. I'm missing some resources, and have that conversation with the boss. Usually that'll help, but you're still going to get into a position where a difficult boss, no matter what you do, is impossible. And if it's just the mixing of personalities, chances are you're going to have to do something about it. You're either going to have to change your personality, which I do not recommend, and it's going to be very hard for you. You're probably going to have to find someplace else where you can work in the company, hopefully within the same organization. If you can't find it within the same organization, my recommendation is you start looking for another job someplace else. So that's the brutal facts of having a difficult boss that you can't make.
I think to go back to your point, I think this is where it could be important. Well, one thing that you could do to work with a difficult boss is to write MBOs or management-based objectives together. Technically, usually what happens is your boss is involved in that process, so you can write objectives together. And that's in a way an indirect or almost direct way of finding out what your boss thinks is important as well, and what he or she thinks is important for you.
This is key because bosses have a lot of stress, and you only are one person working for that boss. If you can put yourselves in the shoes of the boss and start thinking about, she has a lot of reports, not just me. She has a lot of people on her team. She's probably getting pressure from the top of the organization to do something. And the more you can align your work with her pressures, her worries, her projects, the easier it's going to be for you to deal with that person. Let me take one more thing, and we're kind of about time for us to wrap up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because organizations and teams have different cultures or norms as well, and so MBOs are a great way, I think, to get on the same page, especially when you're starting out fresh. And even if you're having difficulties or with a conflict with a difficult boss, this is a way that you can lay things down on paper or get things done together.
You see, we're thinking the same way. The other comment I would make here, and probably this will be the last comment we'll do, and then we'll sign off with you, is that you can't solve this in one meeting. This is something you work your way into. You find some area where you can work with your boss to find agreement and be able to talk about some of the things that are not necessarily difficult, but are making life difficult for you. And if you could get rid of them, that would make life a little bit easier. So work at a little bit at a time. You can't solve this right away. It got where it is in a long time. It's going to take time to solve. If you like your company, you like your job, and you got a bad boss, it's worth spending some time and doing that. It'll pay off for you in the long term. So don't be discouraged on that. Have some patience. I think our time is up. We said we'd do this for 45 minutes. We're going to do it later again in the course. So please send us questions anytime, but we'd like to have your questions while you're on. And again, Jackie and I thank you so much for taking the course. We hope you find it useful. We'll continue to monitor your threads and the questions that we have, and we'll send the comments back to you, but I hope you find it useful. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for your time.